Alright guys, so I'm going to pick up on the second part of the video here. So we left off on the parathyroid glands, so now I'm going to move down to the next one, which is the thymus. The thymus produces one major hormone for us. Okay, so I'm going to write that down here. And that hormone is called thymosin. Now, the major function of thymosin is to help program part of our immune system called T lymphocytes or T cells. And when we get into the lymphatic system chapter, you'll learn all about T cells. But these are very important cells within your immune system, and they have to mature and kind of gain knowledge as to how to work properly to help fight off, invaders within the body. And so they mature in the thymus, all right, and thymosin is the hormone that triggers this maturation of these cells. Okay. The next gland that we get to are these two little pyramid-shaped glands sitting on top of the kidneys called the adrenal glands. Right? Adrenal glands. Now the adrenal glands, just to kind of draw this out, illustrate it for you, they're kind of pyramid-shaped glands, and they have two major regions. Okay, they have an inner region called the adrenal medulla, and then they have an outer region called the adrenal cortex. So I'm going to break these down and talk about the two separate regions and hormones that are produced by each one of these regions. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is the medulla, that inner region of the adrenal gland. Okay, now the medulla produces a certain set of hormones called catecholamines. Catecholamines. And the two major catecholamines that are produced by the adrenal medulla are epinephrine and norepinephrine. You guys might briefly remember talking about epinephrine and norepinephrine in Principles 1 in the nervous system chapter. So both of those hormones are highly involved in the fight or flight response, okay, your sympathetic nervous system response, to help you deal with, stress, any kind of short-term stress within the body. All right, so those are the major ones produced by the adrenal medulla. And then we have the adrenal cortex. And there are several hormones produced by this region. And again, it's the outer region of the adrenal gland. Okay, so there are three major groups of hormones produced by the cortex. We have the mineralocorticoids, all right, and the major mineralocorticoid is aldosterone. And the major function of aldosterone is essentially to regulate the amount of salt at any point in time within your bloodstream. Okay, so regulate salt balance within the blood, essentially. So it kind of has a little play in blood pressure as well. Okay, and we'll talk more about that when we get into the urinary system. All right, the next group of hormones produced by the adrenal cortex are the glucocorticoids. So glucocorticoids, the two major ones that we have are cortisone and cortisol. But these are used essentially to increase blood glucose levels within the body. And blood glucose is just another word for blood sugar. Okay, so this helps increase blood glucose levels within the body. All right. And then lastly, we have sex hormones are produced within the adrenal cortex. So both androgens, which are the male sex hormones, and estrogens, which are the female sex hormones. These are both produced in small amounts within the adrenal cortex as well. Okay. So moving on from the adrenal gland, the next gland we have here is the pancreas. And we'll talk more about the pancreas when we get into the digestive system, because the pancreas is both an endocrine organ and an exocrine organ. It also excretes certain types of gastric juices as well. So we'll talk about that when we get to the digestive system. But the two major hormones that are secreted by the pancreas are insulin and glucagon. And both of these hormones are very important in helping to regulate our blood glucose levels, okay? And they work in opposition to one another, so they're exact opposites in how they work. So insulin gets released by the pancreas when you have high levels of blood glucose. So say you just ate, a big pan of brownies or some cookie dough or something like that. You're going to have a lot of glucose get released into your bloodstream as you digest all of that food that has a lot of sugar in it. And all that glucose our body wants to store that glucose, use it as much as it can, and then store whatever is left over so we can have it for later, right? And the hormone that allows us to store that glucose and allows us to actually get that glucose into our cells is insulin. Okay, so insulin allows sugar to enter into our cells so we can actually use it. It's kind of like a key that allows that glucose to get in. All right. So insulin essentially decreases the amount of glucose within your bloodstream by allowing that glucose to get into your cells of your body. Glucagon does just the opposite. So glucagon gets released if you've gone a really long time without eating any sugar. Okay. Say you have been on a keto diet, you haven't had any sugar in a very long time, eventually glucagon will get released from the pancreas, and that will stimulate a raise or an increase in blood glucose levels. So it's going to stimulate certain structures within the body to release stored glucose from your cells into your bloodstream so it can be used elsewhere. Okay, so glucagon raises blood glucose levels while insulin lowers blood glucose levels, and both of those hormones are produced and secreted by the pancreas. All right, and then we get down to the last two organs, which are the gonads. Okay, and there are two different types of gonads, one for females, one for males. We'll look at the female gonads first, which are the ovaries. All right, so the ovaries. And the ovaries secrete two major types of hormones, and those are estrogen and progesterone. All right. So both of these hormones have pretty big roles, and we'll talk a lot more about them when we get to the reproductive chapter. But some of the roles of estrogen specifically are to stimulate growth of the uterine lining, to help that uterine lining get thicker, to prepare for an egg to possibly implant in that lining and for pregnancy to occur. It also allows for the development of any and all of your female secondary sexual characteristics. So enlargement of the breast, things of that, enlargement of the hips, things that, give you that female look. Now, progesterone allows for the growth of the uterine lining as well. So it's also going to allow for, the female to get ready to become pregnant, all right, and to allow for pregnancy to occur within the female. Now, as far as the male gonads, that's going to be the testes. And the major hormones released by the testes are the male sex hormones, which are known as androgens. And testosterone is the major androgen that gets released. But these are going to have several functions. So it's going to allow for the formation of sperm cells, which are the sex cells of the male. And it's also going to allow for development of their sexual characteristics as well. Okay, so enlargement of the Adam's apple, dropping of the testes, enlargement of the gonads within the male, overall, increase in size of the male, start to, produce pubic hair, things of that nature. So developing those secondary sex characteristics. All right. So here's the testes. Got a little ahead of myself there. All right. So that's all of the organs labeled. And again, I pretty much went through all of the major hormones that we talk about for each one of these organs. But this is not, everything that you need to know from this chapter. This is just a very brief overview for you to kind of skim back through just to see if you've hit all of those high points for each one of those organs. But you still definitely need to go back through the textbook, read the chapter, and make sure you go through the PowerPoint as well, because I get into more detail about certain types of disorders associated with each one of these hormones and organs that you'll definitely want to look at that information as well. Okay, so let me know if you guys have any questions or any problems.